On December 1st, 2018, a 21-year-old traveler from England stepped out into the city of Auckland, New Zealand, for what should have been just another night on her dream adventure. She had spent months planning this trip, saving every penny she could, excited to see the world. That night, she was meeting someone new, a man she had matched with on Tinder. Less than 24 hours later, all communication from her stopped. Her phone went silent. Her social media accounts, which had been full of messages and photos, suddenly froze. Her family, thousands of miles away, waited for a birthday message that never came. And within days, New Zealand police would uncover a trail of evidence leading to a hotel room, a suitcase, and a man who had spent his life deceiving everyone around him. Grace Emmy Rose. Millane was born in Essex, England, in 1996. She was the youngest of 3 siblings, growing up with her 2 older brothers, Michael and Declan. From the start, Grace had a natural warmth about her. She loved art, photography, and theater, always throwing herself into anything creative. She had a close-knit family, and no matter where life took her, they were always a central part of it. As she got older, she pushed herself to achieve her dreams, eventually earning a spot at the University of Lincoln, where she studied advertising and marketing. She had a keen eye for creativity and had big plans for her future. But before diving into the world of work, she wanted to see more of what life had to offer. Like many young travelers, she decided to take a gap year to explore the world. She spent months saving up, carefully planning her route, starting in South America, then heading to Australia and New Zealand before returning home. Before she left, she did something that perfectly captured the kind of person she was. She cut her long brown hair and donated it to a charity that makes wigs for children with cancer. Then, in October 2018, with a backpack full of dreams, she boarded a plane, ready for the adventure of a lifetime. Grace's first stop was South America, where she spent several weeks exploring Peru. She trekked through stunning landscapes, visited Machu Picchu, and met other travelers along the way. She documented everything: photos, messages, updates to her family and friends. She was loving every second of it. By late November, she had made her way to New Zealand. She arrived in Auckland on November 20th, checking into a popular budget hostel, Base Backpackers on Queen Street. She planned to spend a few weeks in New Zealand before heading to Australia for Christmas. She met other travelers at the hostel, but often, when she wasn't exploring the city, she'd spend time calling her family, sharing stories of her journey so far. She was excited. She felt safe, but she had no idea that she was just days away from crossing paths with someone who was hiding a very dark past. It was Saturday night, and Grace had made plans to meet a man she had matched with on Tinder. His name was Jesse Kempson, a 26-year-old who told her he worked as an oil company manager and lived in a luxury hotel in the city. In reality, Jesse wasn't an oil executive. He wasn't successful. He wasn't even financially stable. Everything about him was a lie. Grace had some hesitation about meeting him. She had mentioned to a friend that she was on the fence about going, but after more messages back and forth, she decided to go ahead with it. At 5:45 p.m., she left her hostel, wearing a black dress, white sneakers, and carrying a small handbag. She walked through the busy streets of Auckland, heading towards Sky City, a popular entertainment complex filled with restaurants, bars, and a casino. There, she met Jesse Kempson in person for the first time. She was excited. She had no idea she was walking straight into danger. CCTV cameras captured Grace and Jesse together at Sky City, where they had their first round of drinks. From the outside, everything seemed normal. They laughed, talked, and moved from one bar to another, eventually settling at the Bluestone Room, a popular spot in the city. Grace was texting a friend back home during the date, telling her it was going well. "I click with him so well. He's an oil manager. He lives in a hotel." At some point, While Grace went to the bathroom, Jesse was caught on CCTV picking up her handbag and rummaging through it. Why? No one knows. But it was strange behavior, and something Grace never noticed. The night continued, and around 9:30 p.m., they left the bar together, arm in arm. Again, from the outside, nothing seemed wrong. But Jesse had already decided how the night was going to end. The next morning, December 2nd, was Grace's 22nd birthday. Her family was waiting for a message, a call, something. But nothing came. Her phone was off. Her social media was silent. Her friends tried messaging her. No response. At first, they thought maybe she was just busy. Maybe she was out exploring. But as the hours passed, worry turned to panic. Back in England, her father, David Millane, was growing concerned. She's always in contact. She always shares what she's up to. By December 5th, after 3 days of silence, Grace's parents contacted the New Zealand police and officially reported her missing. Police checked her hostel. Her bags were still there. Her passport was still there. But Grace was gone. This wasn't a case of a traveler missing a flight or changing plans. Something had happened to her. And the last person to see her? Jesse Kempson. By December 5th, Grace had been missing for 4 days. Her family, thousands of miles away, couldn't reach her. Her friends hadn't heard from her. There was no activity on her social media. New Zealand police launched a full-scale missing person investigation. Their first stop, Base Backpackers Hostel, where Grace had been staying. Inside her dorm room, her backpack was still there. So were her clothes, her passport, her toiletries. Nothing was missing except Grace herself. This ruled out the possibility that she had simply moved on to another location. Something had happened to her in Auckland. The police turned to CCTV cameras scattered throughout the city. If Grace had left on her own, the cameras would have seen her. Instead, what they found led them straight to the last person she was with, Jesse Kempson. Security footage showed Grace and Jesse at Sky City, then later at the Bluestone Room. In the early hours of December 2nd, the footage showed them walking into City Life Hotel together, where Jesse was staying. But after that, Grace was never seen again. Police fast-forwarded through hours of footage from the hotel's entrance. No sign of Grace leaving. But Jesse? Jesse was seen multiple times, moving in and out of the building, doing something strange. At 8 a.m., he left alone. By mid-morning, he was at a nearby store, buying a suitcase. Not long after, he went to a supermarket, purchasing cleaning supplies. And just before noon, he took a taxi to a car rental company and rented a red Toyota Corolla. This wasn't normal behavior. And then, things got even more disturbing. Later that night, Jesse met up with another woman from Tinder. While on this date, he brought up the topic of murder, making disturbing comments about how police don't check the bottom of suitcases. The woman felt uneasy. She made an excuse to leave and never spoke to him again. Jesse, meanwhile, went back to his hotel and rented a carpet cleaning machine. At 9:30 p.m., CCTV footage captured him wheeling a hotel trolley through the lobby, loaded with 2 large suitcases. One of those suitcases, detectives feared, contained Grace's body. With mounting CCTV footage and receipts tracking Jesse's every move, detectives knew they needed to talk to him. They reached out, asking him to come in for questioning. He agreed willingly. Maybe he thought he could charm his way out of it. Maybe he believed he had covered his tracks well enough. But what happened in that interrogation room would be the beginning of his downfall. Inside the Auckland police station, Jesse sat across from detectives. He appeared calm, relaxed, even helpful. They started with simple questions. "Tell us about Grace." Jesse smiled, pretending to reminisce about their date. "Yeah, we matched on Tinder. She was really nice. We met up, got some drinks. It was good fun." He described the night as if nothing unusual had happened. Then the detective asked, "When did you last see her?" Without hesitation, Jesse replied, "Oh, around 10 p.m. We left the bar, gave each other a hug, kissed on the cheek, and said goodbye." He claimed Grace went in one direction, and he went the other. "I tried messaging her the next day, but I saw that she had unmatched me, so I figured she wasn't interested." The detectives let him talk. They watched his body language, his tone, the way he tried to steer the conversation. Then they brought out the CCTV footage. They played the clips one by one, right in front of him. Grace didn't leave at 10 p.m. She was seen walking into City Life Hotel with him, and she was never seen leaving. Jesse's face changed. He swallowed hard, his hands clenched together. His story was falling apart. Then came the next bombshell. Realizing his original story wouldn't hold, Jesse suddenly changed tactics. Okay, something did happen. He claimed that after they went back to his hotel, they started getting intimate. She wanted to try rough sex. She asked me to choke her. According to Jesse, Grace encouraged him to apply pressure. We did it for a while, and then I went to take a shower. When I came out, she was gone. He said he panicked when he found her lifeless body. I didn't know what to do. I freaked out. He then admitted to disposing of her body in a suitcase and burying it. But even with this partial confession, Jesse was still trying to make himself the victim. "It was never my intention to hurt her." He insisted it was just a tragic mistake. But the detectives weren't buying it. And when they searched his hotel room, his lies unraveled even more. When forensic teams entered Jesse's hotel room, they found traces of blood on the carpet. Despite his attempts to clean, he had missed spots, areas where blood had seeped into the floor. Even more damning, his Google search history from the night of December 1st. He had searched hottest fire, Waitakere Ranges, where Grace's body would later be found, flesh-eating birds. And after these searches, he spent hours watching pornography, while Grace's lifeless body was still in the room. This wasn't panic. This wasn't an accident. This was a man who had killed someone and was already thinking about covering his tracks. On December 8, 2018, police searched Waitakere Ranges, following the GPS data from Jesse's rental car. It led them to a shallow grave. Inside a discarded suitcase, they found Grace Millane's body. Jesse Kempson was immediately arrested for murder, and what came next would expose the kind of man he really was. Jesse Kempson sat in a police interrogation room for hours, trying to talk his way out of what he had done. He had lied at first, saying he and Grace had parted ways at 10 p.m. Then, when confronted with CCTV footage, he changed his story, claiming her death was an accident. But the evidence told a very different story. His Google searches, his purchases of a suitcase, cleaning supplies, and a rental car. The CCTV footage of him loading Grace's body onto a hotel trolley. And, most damning of all, the forensic evidence found inside his hotel room. The detectives knew they had more than enough to charge him. On December 10th, Jesse Kempson was officially charged with the murder of Grace Millane. That same day, he appeared in Auckland District Court. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, onlookers, people who had never met Grace, but who felt a deep anger over what had happened. Jesse stood before the judge, his face expressionless. As his name was read out, shouts came from the back of the courtroom. A man in the public gallery yelled, "You're a coward!" But Jesse said nothing. He was ordered to remain in custody while awaiting trial. But while he sat in a jail cell, the public was growing more furious by the day. People weren't just outraged over Grace's murder. They were angry at how the case was being handled in the media. And soon, that anger would reach a breaking point. When Jesse's defense team began preparing for trial, they made it very clear what their strategy would be. They were going to claim that Grace had consented to the choking that killed her. The legal term? Sexual misadventure. In other words, they were going to argue that Grace was responsible for her own death. The reaction was immediate. Women's rights groups, the public, even government officials in New Zealand were outraged. People saw it for what it was, victim blaming at its worst. Grace was not responsible for what happened to her. She had trusted someone, and that trust had been betrayed in the worst way possible. As the trial approached, people demanded justice, not excuses. And when Jesse Kempson finally stepped into court, his lies would be exposed for everyone to see. Nearly a year after Grace's death, Jesse Kempson went on trial for murder. For 3 weeks, the jury listened to two very different stories. The prosecution laid out all the evidence, the CCTV footage, the forensic reports, and Jesse's own actions in the hours after Grace died. They made it clear. Jesse hadn't panicked after Grace's death. He had spent the night watching pornography, taking photos of her body, and researching how to dispose of it. He had calmly gone shopping for a suitcase, cleaning products, and a rental car. Then, he had gone on another Tinder date, cracking jokes about how police don't check suitcases. The prosecution made their point crystal clear. Grace Millane had been murdered, and Jesse Kempson had gone to great lengths to cover it up. But the defense tried to spin a very different narrative. They argued that Grace had died during consensual rough sex. They claimed she had engaged in similar acts before, and this time, it had simply gone too far. They even brought in past Tinder conversations from Grace's phone, attempting to show that she had talked about rough sex before. To many people, this was despicable. Jesse was the one who had killed her. Yet, it was Grace's name that was being dragged through the mud. The trial was difficult to watch, but nothing was more heartbreaking than the testimony from Grace's parents. During the sentencing phase, David Millane, Grace's father, stood before the court and spoke directly to Jesse. His voice shook with emotion. "My Grace, my sunshine, was taken from me. You took her future. You took her family's future." He paused. "I torment myself over what you did to my Grace, the terror and pain she must have experienced at your hands. She died terrified and alone in a room with you." In the gallery, people sobbed silently. Jesse didn't look up. For the entire trial, he had refused to show any remorse. And when the verdict finally came in, the courtroom erupted with emotion. The jury deliberated for just 5 hours before returning to the courtroom. The judge turned to the foreman. "Do you find the defendant, Jesse Shane Kempson, guilty or not guilty?" A moment of silence. Then the answer, "Guilty." In the back of the courtroom, someone let out a cry. Grace's mother, who had been unable to travel to New Zealand, had been watching the trial from England. She later said she collapsed with relief when she heard the verdict. Jesse showed no emotion as the decision was read. He was led away in handcuffs. But the story wasn't over, because after he was convicted of Grace's murder, 2 more women came forward with their own horrifying experiences. And suddenly, it became clear, Grace Millane wasn't his first victim. Shortly after Jesse's conviction, 2 women went to police with their own stories. One was an ex-girlfriend who had been in a physically and emotionally abusive relationship with Jesse. She told the court that he had stolen thousands of dollars from her, threatened to kill her and her family, held a knife to her throat while choking her. Another woman, a British tourist, revealed that Jesse had raped her 8 months before killing Grace. She had been too afraid to report it at the time, but now, she was ready to make sure he never hurt anyone again. In 2 separate trials, Jesse was convicted of 8 counts of violent sexual assault, rape, threatening to kill. These new convictions added another 11 years to his sentence. But in the end, it didn't matter. He was already serving life in prison with a minimum of 17 years before parole. Grace Millane's murder was a tragedy that shook the world. But in the wake of her death, her family made sure her name stood for something more than just what happened to her. They launched the Love Grace campaign, collecting handbags filled with essential supplies for women escaping abusive relationships. They raised over £11,000 for charities that support victims of domestic violence. They turned their grief into action. Grace was more than what happened to her. She was an artist, a traveler, a daughter, a sister, a friend. Her life was stolen, but her story will never be forgotten.